Three women have been found guilty of celebrating the October the 7th Hamas attack by displaying images of paragliders at a pro-Palestinian march in central London. The trio, all aged in their 20s, were convicted of a terror offence in order to pay £400 in costs. However, one of the offenders won't even have to pay the fine because she's a migrant who isn't entitled to benefits. So is this a green light for anyone who wants to make offensive statements at protests to escape without proper punishment? Joining me now to discuss this, my panel is already here. Deputy Political Editor of The Sun, Ryan Sabey, journalist and broadcaster Emma Wolfe, and, of course, barrister and broadcaster Mr Andrew Eborn.
Of course.
Very good evening to all of you.
Evening, Mike.
Welcome. And let's kick things off straight away. I mean, how on earth is it right that you could be charged with a terrorist offence, but you just pay a fine, and that's all?
It's incredible. Under the terms of this conditional discharge, if you don't do anything wrong within the first year, there is no punishment. They don't come back. So it is at the real low end of the scale.
Right.
And I've been speaking to MPs this afternoon, and there's real sort of anger about this. At the time, it caused an absolute outrage.
Yes.
And now...
And it was very close to October the 7th, I think.
It was like the following Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the following weekend. And it was very clear what they were trying to signify. They were saying that, you know, wasn't it great what Hamas did? Wasn't it brilliant? They had this amazing sort of, you know, flight in from the sky. And they tried to say in court, I think, that it was some kind of peace symbol that they had put on their
exactly,
jackets,
that's what they were
which
saying.
absolute cobblers. Yeah. I mean, no wonder people are encouraged to just continue to say whatever they like at these marches, you know?
No, yeah, and I think we shouldn't forget the feeling. I mean, it has faded now a little bit, not the outrage and not the, you know, not the hurt, but the feeling in those first few days
shock.
Following the shock. And also just the atrocities that took place on October the 7th.
Yeah.
And yes, we all know what those symbols of you know, paragliders absolutely was meant to indicate.
Yeah, and absolutely, and just to make it clear, it is an offence under the Terrorism Act to it says wear clothing or carry a display of articles in public in such ways or circumstances as to arouse reasonable suspicion that the individual is a member or supporter of a prescribed organisation. So they had these images. It seemed clear, but obviously the court looked at it, and what the judge said in that particular case, they were sort of turning around and saying, well, it's not as serious as it could be in those situations. They're still convicted. It's still a criminal offence. Yeah. But a conditional discharge, as you say, it means that if something happens, basically, again, then they will get convicted and sentenced for...
But that's the same as any other kind of suspended sentence scenario, isn't it? I mean, surely terrorism should be a different category. I mean, if you're going to be charged with a terrorism offence and convicted, then there should be the equivalent of a sex offenders register that you go on to as a terrorist, don't you?
You would have thought so. And I think the other interesting thing...
I mean, what if I'm sitting next to one of these people on the bus?
Yeah.
I think not that I'm on a bus very often.
I think the other thing worth mentioning is the fact that under the unduly lenient sentencing scheme, you can go to the Attorney General and she can recommend that this is looked at again. That only happens in the Crown Court, whereas this was in the Magistrates' Court, so it can't be looked at again. So... I mean, I suppose they've got a conviction of sorts, but you know, it's at the lower end.
Yeah, I know, and I mean, I suppose you know, to give the police some credit for once, because we don't always do it. This is probably why they don't arrest very many people, because they know that the outcome is probably going to be this, and there's not much point in going through all that hard work.
It does depend on the evidence. I mean, the maximum penalty under the Act is 14 years in prison or a fine, but in the lower courts it's 6 months in prison or £5,000. It does depend on the evidence, and the problem when we report...
But what evidence do they need? They were wearing these symbols.
And I think this kind of outcome really will give people, you know, often these don't have much effect, but this will really give people on those marches who want to be offensive, who want to carry banners, who want to chant, you know, really, absolutely terrorist slogans, they'll realise they can do what they want.
Well, we've seen it. We're going to be talking about... Yeah, I mean, we've seen it, and we're going to be talking about it later on. The business at the Soho Theatre, where, you know, a comedian, so-called pro-Palestinian comedian, who thinks it's OK to berate two members of his audience who happen to be Jewish, and basically, you know, swear at them, intimidate them, get the whole crowd chanting at them. You know, this is now considered to be acceptable behaviour.
And it was appalling. I saw that. I saw the clip on Twitter as well, where he was basically on the march and basically riling people up on that sort of basis. So it is appalling. Interesting, I say, just going back to the facts, which is important, they said when delivering the verdict, what they made it clear is there's no evidence in the thing that any of the defendants were supporters of Hamas or were seeking to show support for them. So that's what the court found.
That's ridiculous, isn't it?
But that's what they're saying they found. So as a result of it, that's why they got the lenient sentence. But you're right, looking at the evidence that we've seen, it seemed fairly clear.
Well, I mean, if you're wearing a depiction of something that happened as part of a terrorist atrocity, it's pretty clear why you're doing it, isn't it?
And that's why the Crown prosecution felt there was...
Mickey Mouse running the court system. You know, there's no evidence. I don't know what that means. It's a picture of a parachute. Or
Which
maybe
is
they'll
why the
support
message is
parachute
clear.
regime.
You can act with impunity. You can say and do what you want in this country.
Yeah.
If you're on the right side.
Unless, of course, you want to start, spouting from the Bible or something, in which case you get asked to move along.
In which case, yeah.
I mean, it is just, I find it staggering that the more the judiciary in this country gets involved in these kinds of, fairly high-profile cases, because it is a high-profile case, because normally speaking, magistrates' court, nobody cares. But this is quite an important case.
Oh, very important.
And they just keep getting it wrong, don't they?
And you hear all these cases about soft justice over the years, whatever the case may well be, and this sort of feels like it could, even though the magistrate will have looked at the evidence, looked at everything, it feels like it sort of fits in that category a little bit.
And what about the other business? One of them is a migrant. I don't know whether that's a legal migrant or an illegal migrant. Not allowed to work, presumably, not allowed to get benefits. I mean, I don't know quite how that works, because illegal migrants...
You would have thought she would have been on her best behaviour.
Well, illegal migrants who come here get some form of benefit, so I'm not quite sure what they mean.
I think one of the questions is that it does raise that if they were granted asylum at any stage, you wonder whether the Home Secretary or the government can actually intervene and revoke that.
Well, they won't, though, because this is the same problem we had with the chemical attacker, isn't it? That guy Yazidi, because he was not sent to prison. And you only get deported if you go to prison for more than a year. So if you get a suspended sentence, you don't have to worry about it.
But he should have been deported the minute that the first asylum claim was turned down.
He should have been, of course. But, I mean, that's what we know now as a broken system. But at least you'd hope that the judiciary would catch it.
No, absolutely. And they always say that trust comes in on foot but leads on horseback. And yet trust is an all-time low, both in the media, in terms of the judiciary and various other things. And this is why they introduced this sort of filming, if you like, televising of sentencing. So they could unpack and explain to the audience a bit more as to why it's happened. This case is, on the face of it, is appalling. And you need to sort of turn around and say, look, why have they reached this decision? What they sided actually with them and said, actually, we don't believe you're supporters of Hamas. So that's the reason it's so lenient. Which, looking at that, as you say, it's outrageous on the evidence we've seen. It doesn't make sense.
And you wonder whether they should extend the televised screenings of...
Absolutely.
So instead of just the sentencing, which is great for transparency, whether maybe to extend them, if it's a short case, maybe start with magistrates and screen them.
I mean, one of the great shows I used to watch when I lived in America was talkTV. They actually started an entire channel, and you could watch all sorts of amazing cases from the sublime to the ridiculous all day, every day, sort of 24/7. It was fascinating.
That's how you reach the kind of intellect that you have
That must be what it is,
We used to have Crown Court. Do you remember Crown Court in this country? I used to love that. As a baby barrister, you love all that sort of stuff.
Really fun.